He was a billionaire who could buy anything except hope. His twin boys, once his greatest pride, were born paralyzed, their small bodies confined to hospital beds, surrounded by machines that hummed louder than his prayers. Every specialist, every surgery, every miracle cure failed. He stopped believing in faith, in people, in anything that didn't have a price tag. But then came her, a quiet black maid whose presence barely registered in his mansion, until the day she did something that would shake his world and his soul. What could a woman with nothing possibly give to a man who had everything except love and a reason to believe again? But first, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment below from which city you are watching this video. Before tragedy hollowed out his heart, Richard Wallace lived the kind of life people only saw in magazines. A self-made billionaire, he owned a chain of luxury hotels, a glass mansion on the hill, and an empire that ran like a machine. But inside that mansion, silence ruled. His wife had passed years earlier, and the only sound that broke the stillness came from the soft beeps of medical monitors in the twins' room. His sons, Ethan and Eli, were born paralyzed. Doctors called it a rare neurological condition, but to Richard, it was a curse money couldn't fix. He spent millions chasing hope across continents, specialists in Switzerland, therapies in Japan, but nothing changed. Each disappointment hardened him. He became colder, more mechanical, measuring people by what they could do, not who they were. When his last live-in nurse quit without warning, he barely noticed the replacement the agency sent, a quiet black woman named Clara, who arrived carrying a small suitcase and a humble smile. She moved through the house like a shadow, careful not to be seen, doing her work with grace and silence. To Richard, she was invisible, just another name on payroll. But there was something about her presence that unsettled him. The twins, usually motionless and withdrawn, seemed calmer when she entered. Sometimes he'd catch faint laughter echoing through the hall, soft, foreign, almost impossible. He told himself it was the wind or maybe the machines. Still, something about Clara didn't fit his world. She didn't flinch at his coldness, didn't bow under his wealth, and yet she carried an aura of quiet strength that both irritated and intrigued him. And though Richard didn't know it yet, the woman he ignored was about to do something that would test every belief he'd ever built his empire on. At first, Clara's days followed a quiet rhythm, feeding the twins, reading to them, humming soft hymns from her childhood. She never asked for more than what was given, never complained about the long hours or the heavy silence that lingered in the mansion like a fog. But while she poured care into the children, Richard watched from a distance, his face expressionless. He didn't believe in miracles, especially not from a woman like her. He'd seen people like Clara before, or so he thought, maids, cleaners, workers who faded into the background of his wealth. In his mind, she was just another employee. But the staff began to notice something strange. The twins started reacting, eyes flickering toward her voice, fingers twitching when she sang, even faint smiles when she touched their hands. Rumors spread quietly among the servants. Some whispered that Clara's faith had power, others said she practiced something strange. Richard dismissed it all, until the day he caught her in the twins' room after midnight. She was kneeling beside their beds, whispering prayers, her hands resting gently over the boys' legs. For a moment, the monitors flickered, and the boys' fingers twitched in unison. Richard's chest tightened, half fear, half disbelief. But instead of curiosity, anger took hold. He stormed in, voice sharp as broken glass. "What do you think you're doing?" he snapped. Clara looked up, startled but calm. "Just praying, sir," she said softly. "They seem peaceful when I do." That was all it took for his old prejudices to surface. He accused her of unprofessional behavior, of bringing superstition into his home. He didn't say it aloud, but deep down, what burned him most wasn't the act itself, it was who was doing it. The idea that a poor black maid might bring comfort to his sons when all his doctors and money had failed was unbearable. He gave her a warning: stay in your place. Do your job. Nothing more. Clara nodded quietly, her eyes full of understanding, not defiance. But that same night, she returned to the boys' room anyway. The next morning, something extraordinary happened. Ethan's hand moved, just slightly, a twitch, but unmistakable. The nurse screamed for Richard, who rushed in and stared in disbelief. The doctors were called, tests were run, but no one could explain it. The twins began showing faint signs of improvement, small but real. The household buzzed with awe and confusion, but Richard couldn't accept it. Instead of gratitude, he felt threatened. How could this woman, this maid, succeed where the world's best medicine had failed? He convinced himself it was coincidence, luck, or trickery. Then one afternoon, Richard overheard two guests whispering about Clara. "You're letting her touch them? You know how these people are, always mixing faith and witchcraft." The words made his stomach churn, not from agreement, but from the uncomfortable truth that he had thought the same. Driven by pride and prejudice, Richard made a decision that would change everything. He called Clara into his office, thanked her for her service, and handed her an envelope. "You'll be paid for the month," he said coldly. "Your help is no longer needed." Clara stood there, eyes glistening, not with tears but quiet sorrow. She didn't plead. She simply nodded, placed her hand over her heart, and whispered, "God's work doesn't stop because man says so." As she walked away, Richard felt an unease he couldn't name. That night, the twins' room fell silent again. No laughter, no flicker of movement, just the hollow sound of machines. And deep down, for the first time, the billionaire began to wonder, had he just sent away the only person who could save his sons? Days passed, and the mansion grew colder than ever. Without Clara, the laughter was gone, the faint signs of hope vanished, and the twins' condition worsened faster than any doctor could explain. Machines beeped slower, nurses whispered prayers they weren't supposed to, and Richard felt the weight of silence pressing on him like a curse. He buried himself in work to escape the gnawing guilt. But one stormy night, while reviewing contracts in his dimly lit office, his phone rang. It was the hospital. His twins had stopped breathing. Richard's world blurred. He drove through the rain, headlights slicing the darkness, heart pounding like a war drum. By the time he reached the hospital, doctors were already performing emergency procedures. Tubes, machines, frantic voices. It was chaos wrapped in heartbreak. As he stood frozen, a gentle voice broke through the noise. "Mr. Wallace." He turned. Clara stood at the door, drenched from the rain, her clothes soaked, eyes steady yet sorrowful. "I heard they were taken here," she said quietly. "Please let me see them." Desperation crushed his pride. Without a word, he stepped aside. Clara entered the room, placed her trembling hands on the twins' chests, and began to pray, not in whispers this time, but in a voice trembling with power and pain. Doctors wanted to stop her, but Richard raised his hand. He could feel something shift in the room, a warmth spreading through the air, the monitors flickering erratically. For a moment, everything froze. Then one tiny sound. A heartbeat. Ethan gasped. Eli's eyes fluttered open. Nurses shouted, machines blared, but Richard could only stare in disbelief. The impossible was happening before his eyes. Tears streamed down Clara's face as she whispered. They were never hopeless. Just unseen. In that moment, surrounded by beeping machines and stunned silence, Richard realized the truth. What he had dismissed, mocked, and underestimated had just saved his children's lives. But before he could speak, Clara looked at him one last time, whispered a prayer of thanks, and walked out into the rain, disappearing into the night. The following morning, the mansion that had once echoed with emptiness was filled with life again. The twins' laughter, soft, pure, and miraculous, drifted through the halls like music reborn. But Richard couldn't bring himself to smile. Not fully, because the one person who had made the impossible happen was gone. He tried to find Clara, called the agency, searched the city, but she'd vanished without a trace. It was as if she'd come only to leave a lesson behind. For the first time, Richard sat beside his sons and prayed, not for wealth or success, but for forgiveness. Forgiveness for his blindness, his arrogance, and the prejudice that had cost him something priceless. In the days that followed, the media called the twins' recovery a medical miracle. Doctors claimed spontaneous remission, but Richard knew better. He knew it wasn't medicine or money that had healed his sons, it was compassion. The kind that can't be bought or measured, only felt. He quietly established a foundation in Clara's name, a fund for underprivileged black women in healthcare, caregivers, and single mothers. He wanted her strength to echo beyond his guilt. But deep inside, he knew the real change couldn't come from money. It had to come from heart, because prejudice isn't always loud or violent. Sometimes it hides behind polite smiles and silent assumptions. It's the unseen wall that divides worth from worthiness and humanity from humility. Richard's story is a mirror, one that forces us to ask ourselves, how many Claras do we overlook every day? How many hands capable of healing have we turned away because of the color of their skin? Maybe true wealth isn't found in what we own, but in how we see each other. If this story moved you, share it. Because change doesn't start in power, it starts in a heart that chooses to see beyond it.